So S&P Global Mobility has released a report on nomads and how brands are doing capturing them and keeping them. Welcome back to All Cars, y'all. I'm John, and this actually came out a while ago, and I've been kind of pondering it. And I decided it was time to do a video because I think there's a couple of big takeaways from this. Now, the first thing is that I'm going to be using my take on this, my words for almost all of it, and I'll provide a link to the actual S&P Global Mobility website below where you can read it for yourself. I think they went out of their way to make this as complex as possible, and I've really pondered through it. And what a nomad is someone who's owned a brand and they're moving to a different brand. Okay? You've owned your Nissan and you're moving to a Toyota, for example. Basically, I think of them as brand agnostic. They're looking for the next one. Now, according to their report, nomads tend to be the wealthiest families of highly educated professionals. They tend to live in suburban neighborhoods and have high disposable incomes. And so what they're trying to do here is measure two different things. The first is a brand capturing new buyers, and do they keep those buyers for that next purchase, for that second purchase. So they've done this chart here. It's pretty cool, but it is a little complex. So let's start by taking a look at this and explaining it. So on the left, on the vertical axis, you have nomad share of RTM, where RTM stands for return to market. And so that's somebody who's getting ready to buy their next car, basically. And on the horizontal axis, you have one and done, and that is they bought and they're moving on to a different brand next. There's a couple of really important takeaways here, and it's interesting to look at this data. The first is over here on the left, on the top is Tesla, a very, very high capture of return to market. Now this makes a lot of sense. Tesla is a relatively new brand. They've been expanding slowly their portfolio, and the thought that somebody owns a BMW and is moving to Tesla makes a lot of sense because Tesla's capturing a lot of new buyers. So that gets them really, really high. It's interesting over here on the right, you see that like Ram and Dodge are rather high vertically as well. Now across the bottom, you've got that one and done. I own a car, I'm moving to a different brand with the next purchase. And again, over on the left, you've got Tesla. They have an unbelievable rate of keeping buyers once they've purchased a Tesla. This is really powerful stuff, and I think this brings in a third element that's not specifically measured here, but kind of says they're satisfied with the car. You know, if you buy a car and you're unhappy with it, you move on to another brand. Tesla seems to be doing a really good job of owner loyalty, keeping people with the brand. So in spite of how you can go on social media and find people who are complaining about the paint job on the inside of the trunk of Teslas and things like that, Tesla's doing a real good job of capturing new buyers and holding on to them. Interesting tidbit here, number 2 is Ford. They have a very low one and done rate. Now, while they're down here at the bottom, we'll talk more about that in a minute, they're actually second. And Subaru, also on this horizontal axis, is very close as well. Now, one of the things this chart represents is specifically brands having the models that get people interested and get people excited about coming in. So you can see that Hyundai and Kia and Subaru are all here above that industry average line. And this represents a period when they introduced, all of them, larger 3-row SUVs. So they're offering a product that more people are wanting to move up into. And again, I really want to highlight over here, Ram and Dodge are on the opposite side of higher one and done rate. I'm not harping on Ram and Dodge, I'll come back to it. It's worth mentioning here that this does not represent every manufacturer. For example, you can only have to glance at it and see that Infiniti isn't listed here while Acura is. It does not have Chrysler on here, and so that's, some makes are not shown based on they didn't fit a basic level criteria to be included in the data. So there's a couple of big takeaways from this, and I want to start down here with our grouping of Toyota, Ford, and Chevy, and to a lesser extent Honda and Nissan. Toyota and Ford on the horizontal axis here are pretty darn close to each other, which means that once somebody buys a Toyota and a Ford, they tend to stay with it. Chevy is a little bit worse, slightly worse. But on that vertical axis, Toyota and Chevy pretty even, while Ford is less. So Toyota and Chevy are doing a slightly better job at capturing a new buyer from another make. I think that's really interesting. Now, you might look at this and say, well, why are they all, three of the biggest brands, why are they all clumped down here? First off, they're very well established. They have a lot of sales. There's harder work to capture that new buyer, and they get to keep some of them, more of them once they get in there. There's less room for growth. But it is also worth noting that these are three well-established brands that have very full portfolios. And so people don't need to move somewhere else to get the next product they're looking for as their life changes. For example, if you bought a Ford Escape and you need something bigger, well, they've got something waiting there for you. When you're ready for your full-size truck, guess what? They've got one for you. And the same with Toyota and Chevy. It's a little interesting to me that Nissan is pretty close to the industry average in terms of one and done, and slightly better in terms of capturing people, or slightly worse at capturing people returning to market. So Nissan, although they're pretty close to the same category as a full line manufacturer, they're not quite as good as Honda, Chevy, and Toyota. Well, that brings us up into this one quadrant up here with Mazda, GMC, and Volkswagen. So while GMC and Volkswagen and Mazda and Audi, for example, are doing a pretty good job of capturing those people on that vertical axis, people who are looking for a new brand and moving into them, they're doing worse than the industry average of actually keeping them when they get there. Now, GMC is largely sport utilities and trucks. If you want something else, you got to go somewhere else. Again, if this measures satisfaction, then I think this is a little bit of a damning position on the actual chart. Same thing for Volkswagen. They're higher in terms of capturing new buyers, but that's because they've introduced new products and expanded their sport utility portfolio, but it seems that they move on. Now, Dodge and Ram, I specifically want to take a look at here. My first takeaway was about Chevy, Toyota, and Ford, how closely clumped together they are, and representing the three biggest manufacturers that have the most full lines. But the second takeaway is Ram and Dodge being over here. Now, I wish there was some more data in terms of looking at Cadillac and Buick and Lincoln and other brands like that, for example, but it really jumps out at me, and I wish they had Chrysler on here as well, that Dodge and Ram are both doing a really good job of capturing those buyers moving from another brand, but they're doing a horrible job of keeping them. And part of that is they don't have full lines. For example, if you have a Ram and you want a sport utility, well, you've got to go somewhere else for it. And for Dodge, if you want a four-door sports car or a two-door sports car, there's your option. But if you want to move to a sport utility or to a truck, this isn't the place for you to be. And I think what this indicates is a major, major weakness in the brand strategy that Stellantis is working on. I think that Stellantis is making their life as difficult as possible, and I blame this back on the Fiat Chrysler alliance. In an effort to make Dodge more appealing by leaning into their performance heritage, they've ended up with a hollowed out shell of offerings where people have no mobility within the brand. And same thing with Ram, because it's no longer the Dodge Ram, it's just Ram. If you're a Ram buyer, you have to go somewhere else if you want something other than a truck. And it applies to Chrysler, even though they don't show up on this chart either. So I think that second big takeaway is for brands such as Honda and Acura, Toyota and Lexus, but also specifically Stellantis, how are they going to fill out their lineups? And when you have different brands that represent different sectors of the market, how can they get buyers to understand that if you're here in a Dodge, but you want a minivan, move to the Chrysler. Don't go look at Toyota or Honda, for example. If you are a Dodge and you need a truck, move to Ram. I think that measurement needs to be made of not just brand loyalty, but loyalty within a corporate structure of having brands you move up to, just like the old days. Right here, I don't see it. Except maybe that's what the high points for Dodge and Ram are. I don't know. That's my question. I don't see any way to find that out. I haven't found anything that reflects that, of the corporate loyalty, of the success of moving people from one brand to another. Right here, what I see is with Ram and Dodge's position, they've made their lives as difficult as possible. I appreciate you being here, guys. Let me know your thoughts below.